Excited to chat with you. As you know, I know we talked a few minutes before getting on here, but just like talking with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs on this journey, I've been doing this, I'm almost 7 years. It's so interesting of like the way people get into what they're doing today, whether they're founding a company or doing something different, and this kind of this random path in life that you show up on. So I always like to start the conversation, if you don't mind, maybe sharing, because I know now at this point you founded two companies, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm an addict.
So help me out. I guess we'll start maybe. Let's even go back further. Like, did you always have aspirations to start your own company, or was that something that spawned on maybe as something happened at a role or maybe in college? Maybe start us there, and then we can go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I think a part of me was always very entrepreneurial. Even growing up, I was always hustling to find ways to make money. My parents were both in the Air Force, so my dad was a pilot. I moved every single year.
Oh wow.
So what I lacked in friends, I made up for in new business ideas. Just as a kid, like I was homeschooled a lot, so that led me to the internet, which led me to, hey, how do I make money on the internet? So ever since I was young, I had a lot of free time, spent it really learning technology and finding ways to use technology to make money. But as far as like long-term goals, as I grew up, I think I was probably less so interested in being a full-time entrepreneur once I realized you could have a stable income with really good, consistent revenue coming in. So I think a part of me fell in love with the stability of having a job once I left college. And so I would say it was kind of rediscovering that lost love of entrepreneurship when I was at HubSpot. Just a bit of background on me. I went into tech right after college. And sorry, I'm getting some echo. But I went into tech right after college, and I really HubSpot was launching HubSpot for startups at the time, which was a program to help entrepreneurs really like learn how to use technology. And so I got a ton of exposure to early founders, and I realized like, whoa, this is not only something that sounds awesome. I got to meet the people that were doing it and realized like, hey, I can do this too. And so that's kind of really what brought my spark back in terms of, hey, let's go do it ourselves.
Did talking with those, and maybe it's similar to me. Like I know, like once you get in that pool of talking with folks, you're kind of, it almost gives you this confidence of, wait a minute, it doesn't seem like I can't do it. This seems like something that actually I could handle, which I never thought possible. What were some things they were saying or doing? Maybe that was there anything specific you remember where it was like an aha moment?
Yeah, I think it was realizing that they have problems just like everybody, that they have stuff they can't solve. They were coming to HubSpot with a lot of issues in terms of, how do I grow my company? We just raised a ton of money. What do I do with it? How do I make my customers not churn every 6 weeks? So I think it was realizing like I caught these founders at sometimes vulnerable moments in their business where they were just hands in the air. What do I do? And I think that made me realize like, whoa, these people are human. They have problems, they have challenges. And I think I used to look at like entrepreneurs as sort of these like invincible type of people that just scaled to $1 billion. So I think it was that vulnerability that made me realize like, hey, these people have challenges. It's just a matter of like solving them, getting through them. And that humanness, I think, is what made me realize, hey, I can do this as well. So I think that'd be like the biggest piece that motivated me to kind of jump in on my own.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right because like if you highlight a lot of the top entrepreneurs, quote unquote, whatever the Steve Jobs of the world, right? We see a lot of the points when they got there, but you rarely see the early stages when they struggled like hell and when they're selling
Mm.
computers out of the garage type thing. So I think you're right, like being able to be exposed to that of like, oh shit, like there's real issues here before they actually make it big. And what's big anyways, right? Like even if you have a sustainable business and you're doing well and you're profitable, that could be just as good. You don't have to be a unicorn, right? I think
Totally.
there's value there. What so as you start, and I don't know if it was at HubSpot or maybe as you got to Klaviyo, like when did you think about, or when did the idea, I guess, pop in for the first business you started? Give me an idea of the ideation there.
Yeah, I think it was 2020, right when COVID hits, right when a lot of businesses were popping up because everybody had a ton of free time.
Yeah.
I was at that time I had saved up money to go purchase a home, which was kind of the standard trajectory of a mid 20s guy. And so I was about to purchase a home, and then I realized like, hey, let's use this money. What if I use this money as like an experiment to go start a company? So I think initially there wasn't like an idea right off the bat. It was more of, hey, I want to use this money that I was going to use to buy a home to go out and build a company, and just really thinking of it as like a learning exercise, almost like an MBA
Uh,
type deal where I'm just going to pick an idea I'm passionate about. So I think the decision came before the idea. And then over the next like few months, I just thought about what's something I'm really interested in and passionate about. I wasn't necessarily concerned, hey, is this a big idea? Is this a sustainable idea? Can I build an incredibly large business around it? It was more of what's something I'm super passionate about. And then from there, what can I do today that's simple and that I can build a proof of concept for? And so at the time, I was talking to e-commerce stores every day, and all I could hear was how much they're trying to create better loyalty and better relationships with their customers. And at the other end, I was like obsessed with this idea of blockchain. So basically, in my mind, I was like, all right, I'm going to go build a business that somehow combines customer relationship and loyalty with blockchain. And then that's what led me to start my first company, which was Nifty Bridge, which was a Shopify app that helped people basically tokenize loyalty for Shopify.
you don't have any tech background though, do you?
I didn't. So that was the other thing. I think I was a little naive.
Yeah.
I was kind of just like, hey, I want to go do this. And then once I decided it, I had to research, hey, what's the next steps? I went on Upwork. I went through probably 12 people that told me my idea was really awful. So there was a large process of just like figuring out someone that would take a chance on me, even though I was paying them money. That's what I was confused about. I was like, hey, I got this money, help me build this thing. So it was hard to find someone that was willing to build what I wanted to build. And then once I found that person, I realized I needed to level up my own technical acumen.
Mhm.
And so that's when I started taking coding courses. I started learning about um, software architecture, how to use APIs, how to actually go about architecting this stuff. And that helped me so that I knew the work that was being done was actually good work.
Mm. I want to go back for a second because you've said a couple things already. This idea, and this has come up on the podcast a lot very recently, even this idea of is discipline, is ambition, is that innate with us, or is that something that's developed through the environment? And I'm kind of curious, and maybe this takes you back to your parents and your travels, but like you mentioned about, oh, I like to search on the internet and stuff like that, which is cool. But this whole idea of like taking ownership of something, hey, like coding classes, right? A lot of people wouldn't do that. Or even, and we'll get into this more, like delaying the gratification of buying this house, which is a status symbol, to actually go do something else that, you might not see the fruits of that labor. I- Can you share just a little bit about maybe the upbringing? Like, was that something that was instilled with you, or did it just come out of nowhere? Like, it's always curious to me.
Yeah, I think it definitely is something that was instilled from an early age. I was always, my family was very big into sports. So I think a lot of that competitiveness and drive came from athletics.
Mhm.
And I think also just by nature of moving every year, I moved every single year, almost every year or two. So every year or two, I would pack my bags, move to a completely different location, sometimes across the country. I lived in Japan, Hawaii, all over the US. And so I think it instilled this element of adaptability and trying to like conquer my surroundings, or at least like integrate and perform in any situation. So that combined with the sports background, I think it gave birth to kind of this like love for the unknown, for kind of like trying new things and testing new things out. And I was also alone a lot. So I learned how to um, I guess use that time wisely and develop my skills to be useful. So I think it was definitely a combination of how I was raised, and then I think ultimately, right, it's how we continue to foster that. So obviously, maybe we're born or we learn things, but then how are we fueling that? Because I think as you grow up, you can either fuel that or you can starve it out, and then you lose some of that. So I do think that there's definitely a role in terms of as you grow up, are you fueling that desire? Are you fueling those instincts, or are you kind of starving them out and you slowly start to lose
Yeah.
them? So for me, it was definitely a combination of being born with those things, but also continuing to fuel those desires as I grew up.
Yeah, and there's this, and I don't know if you're seeing this with maybe a lot of folks maybe come up to you and ask advice about starting companies or anything now. You maybe get to that point, but I'm kind of curious with the folks that it's almost like some people see the opportunity and others see the brick wall. And it's like you said, oh, I went on Upwork. Other people, they would have got the three people that said this is a dumb idea, and they'd be like, all right, I'm going back to doing whatever. You kept going, right? There's some point I think of like, we have to say, hey, this is not their best fit and move, right? But there's
Yeah.
some of that you have to, I think, have that push of I believe in this enough. Other people may not. Do you see that a lot with early founders or folks you talk with that they kind of almost put blockades in the way that prevent them from even starting or taking that first step?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think definitely I talk to a lot of people, as you, right, you have a business as well, right? So I'm sure that you become the guy where, as you're walking, people might come up or your friends will know you as someone who started a business. So people want to tell you about their ideas and want to get your feedback. And I think what's so interesting about running a business or starting a business is that a lot of people get stuck in kind of their heads in terms of finding the perfect idea or telling as many people as possible. And I think the skill set of um, executing on a bad idea is actually probably more valuable than
Yeah.
having a great idea and not executing. And so I feel like it's always, and I'm sure this is a reoccurring theme, right? The whole show is about getting started,
Yeah.
but that is really the harder part of it. Great ideas are awesome, but a bad idea executed a poor idea executed really well is actually a better process and a better learning experience. So I would agree with you, and I think it's less about the thing that you're doing and it's more about how it's affecting you. And so what I mean by that is if you're just wanting to lunge into starting a business, I think it's less about what the business is and it's more about how it's going to transform you, how it's going to change your work ethic, your lifestyle, your mental and physical capacity. It's going to work in you something that's actually really valuable. And I think that that's the mindset that a lot of newer founders should have is, look, at the end of the day, this is a risk. It might not work out. Some of this is also timing and luck based.
Mhm.
But if you can look at it like, hey, how can I improve through this process? That's the kind of mindset I think that leads to successful founders and companies in the long run.
Yeah, that's a very mature way to look at it, I think, because you're right. There's that opportunity to I get because I've published a few children's books, and I get a lot of folks that ask about like the writing process and stuff like that. And I'm like, but everyone has a shitty first draft. Even the Shakespeare probably if back in his day, everyone has to go through that. But as you go through that, and you've probably seen this with the companies, right? As you go through that, that's where new ideas develop. So if you don't have all those
Mhm.
crappy ideas, as you're saying, the bad idea executed, you don't get a chance to maybe get to some of those good ideas or a better way to frame the situation. I think if you just stuck, just like, oh, this is not going to work, and then move on, you never actually get to see those exposed. I think that's where there's a lot of struggle with a lot of folks. I'm assuming you agree with that based on what you said.
Absolutely. I think people tend to look at their life on sort of a graph and they're always looking at sort of the performance indicators,
Mhm.
but they're never looking at like what's happening inside of them. Like what skill sets can you not see on like a chart that charts out revenue or success? I think that in the beginning, I would encourage people, and this is almost me talking to myself 5 years ago, but look at how you're changing as opposed to maybe how your business is growing, because those are the things that long term lead to success. How you're becoming a better leader, how you're navigating stress, how you're learning how to be determined, how are you building that can't stop won't stop attitude. Those are kind of that's the special sauce of really what creates special founders, in my opinion. And so how often are people looking at those metrics? They're not always realizing, hey, my business isn't crushing it, like, but I'm learning a lot. Like, people don't always think like that, I think, and that's a mistake.
Yeah. When did you decide it was the right time to leave your sales role and go full time on this stuff?
Yeah, that decision was actually pretty easy because I was working two jobs. So while I was building Nifty Bridge, I was also working at Clavio, and essentially I was kind of torn between the two pieces because I loved Klaviyo so much, and it was an awesome opportunity with steady revenue and income. And on the other side, you had a startup that had experienced a massive like liftoff, but then I was like really struggling to like grow at that next
Mhm.
level. And what ended up happening is the decision was kind of taken out of my hands at one point because someone had offered to purchase the company. So I actually sold that company. As a part of that acquisition, they brought me on to run, bringing that technology to a new industry. So it ended up working out great where I kind of got to move away from Klaviyo and step into kind of a more, I would say, mature CEO role, running Nifty Bridge at the time.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So the kind of opportunity was presented to you, and that made it maybe an easier switch, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was definitely struggling with that decision because I think when you work at a really great company like Klaviyo, I think it can be challenging because you see how volatile and difficult running a business is. So I was nervous about really fully going away from Klaviyo. So it was actually great that that had happened because it made that decision a lot easier for me.
Yeah. Well, so what then? When did the idea for First Touch come up? Where did this come out of it? I'm assuming you saw some issue or heard some problem, but I'll let you tell that story.
Yeah. So after I sold my first company, about 6 months later, I had helped kind of get that business to a point where it was running, and brought someone else in to kind of manage a lot of it. And then I think at that point, I really wanted to tackle something, a bigger challenge, and go after a bigger market. I think my first company, like I said, I was really meant to be a trial run and an experiment to really learn the skill sets I needed to be a founder and to build a company. And so my second company, the idea was always there, I think, because I was actually a BDR at HubSpot once upon a time. And I was selling and I was on the phones and doing cold emailing. And that was like a deeply painful problem that I knew that every business had. And so when I thought about stepping into the next venture, I wanted to go after a problem that I knew really well and a problem that was really, really painful. So I think with First Touch, it really just lined up where it was the perfect time with AI coming out and really starting to develop, along with my background and my connections in terms of software sales. So it made a lot of sense for me to jump into that and really try and build something even bigger than my previous company.
So, what did you learn from that first company that helped you maybe, I don't know, maybe accelerates not the best word, but not have stumbles out of the gate with this new one?
Yeah, so much. It's hard to quantify 2.5 years of learnings into one simple outcome, but I would say definitely the biggest thing I learned was confidence. That was the most important. I think going through it once, going through the highs and lows, experiencing all that running a startup has, and then ultimately, sorry, my I'm going to start over. I think the biggest thing, right, is confidence for me. So I think going through the process of running a company once and then coming back in a second time and knowing that, like, hey, I've navigated this, I've seen the highs, I've seen the lows, I know what to expect, but I have the confidence in myself that I can go out and execute. I think that's really the biggest thing I've learned because at the end of the day, when you're running a company, the buck stops with you, and so there's going to be moments where you don't know what to do, and but nobody else is going to come in and save you, so you've got to kind of like learn who you are and what the next best step is, and that requires a certain level of like faith and commitment to it. And when you come out on the other side, that's where you start to develop that confidence where now when you step into that next venture, you know how these things work, you know how they move, and you've cultivated that mindset that can take you farther than you went before. So I would summarize it just confidence. I think that's like one of the most underrated things that a founder can develop. And it's not something that you can just do. You have to see a result, right? That's kind of really where you get that confidence from.
Well, it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. It's like even executing on a bad idea and seeing some things through or learning about yourself, that's the only way. It's action. That's the only way you can't just, wake up one day and be like, I feel confident today. Like there's got to be something, merit behind it. So I agree. Um, what was the decision, or maybe not decision? Like, because you co-founded this, right? Uh, how did you guys meet? What's the backstory of having a founder or a co-founder?
Yeah, so funny enough, I initially wanted to bootstrap First Touch as well. So my second run through. But then I think I showed it to some people early on and I realized it was something a lot more special than I had initially imagined.
Mhm.
And so at that point, I think another lesson I learned from my first company is, hey, let's not try and do it, all ourselves. I think a lot of us, business owners, we have the tendency to like hold things really tight with a closed fist.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to bring in the right people. And I had already built kind of the first proof of concept of First Touch. And I took that and showed basically like the people in my life that I wanted to be a part of it. And one of those was Michael Kurson, who was at Klaviyo. He was one of the best sellers there. And I showed him the initial proof of concept. Initially, I think he was like, okay, let me play around with it. Let me have my BDR use it. And then on the other side, Michael is his name as well, my other co-founder. He was actually involved from the very beginning. He actually built Nifty Bridge with me.
Mhm.
So he was definitely someone I wanted to bring on the second time around. And then Michael Kurson, who was at Klaviyo, I knew I had to get him involved. So I let him use the tool. Sure enough, I'd say a month later, he came back and was like, this is awesome. How do I get involved? And so we eventually put together the three of us and really started to scale it up. That's when we raised funding as well this
Yeah.
summer.
What did maybe if you can go down this rabbit hole, because I think this might be helpful. We don't talk about this a ton, but that proof of concept, like what was it a workable solution? Like or maybe the initial idea, were you just trying to do some like wireframes just to kind of get the idea out? Like, how did you think about the proof of concept? And, or maybe a better way to say it is like, how should folks think about proof of concept from what you've learned?
Yeah, I think proof of concept is something that's super relevant to a lot of the conversations I have with new founders. I think people want to go create the end product. There's that desire to create something perfect,
Mhm.
and that's good. That's definitely a good thing to have. But I think, for me, the proof of concept, I was able to do it with my first company, but with First Touch, it was just the most bare bones Chrome extension. So I did create a Chrome extension, very ugly. Also, I don't want to say ugly because the people that designed it, but it wasn't the prettiest thing.
Yeah.
But it got to a personalized email. The whole goal of the product was to produce an email that felt like a human wrote it, that felt like someone did the research and tried to create a connection.
Mhm.
And so the proof of concept was simply like, what's the quickest way to get to that experience? What's the quickest way to show someone that aha moment within your product? And then everything else doesn't really matter. Can it scale? Don't worry about that. Does it look pretty? Don't worry about that. But can it make someone go, aha, I get it? That's really, to me, the proof of concept. And then from there, you can either get the feedback of like, I don't get it, no aha moment, or that you do see that aha moment and you can start to build around it, and then go from there. Because the worst thing you can do is go out and build an amazing product and then you show it to your end users and they don't want it. And that definitely can happen.
What was like the time when you said, "Ooh, we're going to do a proof of concept to getting it done"? Like, I don't even know what it takes to build a Chrome extension. I don't think that's easy, but it's probably not terribly hard, like building a full product.
Yeah, it's definitely not that hard. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around software as this, big, heavy, technically advanced thing that requires 6 to 12 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars to build. The reality is there's new technology now, but even in the past, you can get to something that's bare bones that is really cheap. Like you can create a very decent piece of like proof of concept software for less than 10 grand today, and depending on what you're doing. So I do think that it's really important to have people that have done it before around you. I think one big recommendation I always tell people is, just getting started, right, as the podcast. I think get people around you that have that mindset of getting started and that have gone through it. Get close to them because then they're going to be able to tell you, hey, here's how to think about this. Here's how to get to a proof of concept. Here's how much you should spend. Going through that without someone, I've done that. It definitely is a much harder road.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage listeners to just find people that have the mindset of like, just get started, get around as many people like that, and it will become a lot easier.
When you think about the product in terms of, okay, we have a proof of concept, got a few people on board that we want to kind of go in the battle together. How do you get to the point of actually someone paying you for this or using it day in and day out? Like, did you have some game plan of like, these are the people we want to go toward? This is how we're going to get it out to market. Can you share just a little about that, kind of early stage?
Yeah, I definitely. I think this is the really challenging part is taking a cool aha idea that looks amazing, but then making it real to someone's day and driving real value. And so this is something even now today, First Touch, we have over 1,600 sales rep using our tool, but we're still figuring out what is that perfect combination of workflows mixed with value that really is going to drive a massive wedge in this market. Um, and so I think the way that you do that is just creating as many feedback loops as possible within the business. So, if that means talking to customers, great. If that means talking to people who are in the industry that are trying to buy your product, great. Even talking to your own developers and figuring out how can you continue to create shorter feedback loops on releasing new products, getting feedback, then coming back and releasing a new feature like every week. Like we try to at First Touch, we try to every single week release a new feature and get feedback and iterate. And so there's no really like there's no equation to that process, and that's why it's hard. That's why there's so many startups that fail. I do think, and I want to call out this idea that I see this a lot online, where it's like, hey, get a bunch of feedback, fix your product. Get a bunch of feedback, fix your product. That's kind of what everybody
Hmm.
says. The reality is, if it was that easy, there'd be a lot more billion-dollar software companies. There's nuance to where it's not just listening to what your customer says, and going out and building it, but it's actually understanding the pain points,
Yeah.
because your customers don't know what's possible. They don't know how to build software. They don't know what can be done in terms of making their day easier. And so, as a founder, if you're going to build a product that's deeply valuable, you need to not just understand their pain points, but you need to understand there might be a solution that they're not seeing, and the way that you craft that solution matters a lot. So, a lot to say that it's not always A to B when it comes to taking a product and then making it a part of their workflow.
Yeah.
And you really have to have great listening. And the way you do that is just by having more conversations.
Well, I think that's really a great lesson too for founders that for sales. I have a dozen plus years in software sales, and I think one of the things you talk with a potential client, and when the red flag goes up to me when someone says, "Oh, I need it to do this," and it's like, well, hold on a second. Tell me your problem first. There might be 10 solutions. We don't know the exact one. Just because you hear this buzzword, oh, I need X, doesn't mean you actually need X. And I think sometimes people don't know what they actually need. So to your point, you have to, I mean, that's part of your job, kind of running the company is that, hey, we think this could be the path that they should be. Just because they're doing it today this way doesn't mean they should be doing it in 3 months this way or 6 months or a year. Right. So I think you're right. I mean, I remember I had David Heinemeier Hansen that started Basecamp. And I remember him telling me on here, he's like, Brian, he's like, you almost don't listen to the customers because you're going to get 10,000 feature requests. You can't do them all. And none to say that they're even relevant and acceptable. So I think you have to make some of those critical decisions as a co-founder, right? You know,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you just have to be friendly with yourself as a founder. If you're very into the product like I am, I live in our product. I would consider myself definitely a product focused founder, even though I do have a sales background. I think you got to forgive yourself a little bit and be friendly with
yeah,
yourself. You'll do things where you think something's great and you're like, this is the secret thing, and then you show people and then it's not the secret thing, and your tendency will be, oh, okay, well, maybe I just need to tell it differently, or maybe I need to do, we're always trying to find that perfect line.
yeah,
And I think as a founder, sometimes there isn't a perfect line. It's just a matter of, hey, like, owning up on where you're missing and continuing to iterate, and eventually you'll find it. But at least for me, I'm almost preaching to myself. There's not always that like nailing it line. You've got to find those failures along the way to get to where you want to go. And that's actually totally fine. And so you just got to be friendly with yourself, I would say.
Yeah. So in terms of the product, what do you feel like in terms of this problem you're solving? We can assume, okay, we're getting more emails to the right people. Maybe it saves some time and energy. But like, what's the initial problem, I guess, that you were going to solve when you started it, and has that changed at all? Like, has the problem that you're solving changed at all in the time you've had First Touch?
Yeah, I think the initial problem was the problem that everyone feels when they open up their inbox and they hit the spam button and they see just the floods of awful communication they get.
Mhm.
So that's on one side of the problem, right? The receiving side. And then on the seller's side, it's that process of looking at your Gmail and thinking, what am I going to write right now? What is it going to, and knowing that they're probably not going to open it and they're not going to reply.
Yeah.
So it's a very painful problem, not just for sellers, but also for buyers. And so I think that's really what First Touch really was sprouted from. The idea of First Touch, people think it's like, oh, the first touch point. In reality, it's a soccer analogy. That was my initial concept of in soccer, the first touch is when you get past the ball. It's being able to control it. It's all about ball control.
Mhm.
And so the platform was really to help reps have better ball control, knowing what to say, knowing how to provide value at every interaction, whether it's a meeting or whether it's a next step. So that was the initial concept of First Touch. I think as we've grown and we're only just under a year old, I think we've realized that that problem is deeply embedded into organizations to where you can't just come in and think that a tool is going to fix the underlying issues of some of these sales organizations. And so I think what we've realized is that there's more than just a problem of messaging and research, which is what First Touch does. We help research better and create better messaging.
Mhm.
But there's actually problems with things like we're not reaching out to the right people. We have a process that just frankly stinks, right? We don't have good contact data. We don't have clean data.
Yeah.
So you realize First Touch, if you put it on top of a broken wheel, the car's not going to, run. Like if you have a great engine and broken wheels, it's not going to run properly. And so I think the biggest thing for us is realizing how do we take what we do best but do it in a way that aligns and kind of fixes some of those underlying processes, knowing that you're not going to be able to fix everything.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every contact I had to manually enter into Salesforce, like, oh my gosh, that's such a pain in the neck. Well, and I think you're right. I mean, the sale, like, I even look at this, and this goes probably to, not calling out sales enablement or these teams at larger companies, but they actually, I don't know if they did this to you at like a HubSpot or anything, but I know a lot of BDRs I've worked with, like, they'll block their sales loft cadence, and they can't even change the wording. They have to send exactly what's like marketing put together. I'm like, guys, this is ridiculous. It's laughable. So I'm sure you guys deal with that all the time then.
Yeah, you're speaking. It sounds like you know the problem just as well as we do. I think when you peel back the layers of like why are people sending spam,
Yeah.
you realize like whoa, there's actual organizational structures that are built to send spam. So you can't just come in and say, hey, we're not going to send spam, because then it affects like 12 different people's roles and targets and metrics. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a fun space, but I think it's definitely also a really humbling experience when you're at the forefront of AI and you're doing all these awesome things with new
Mhm.
technology and realizing at the end of the day, people move really slow, businesses move even slower. And so it's less about who can build the most advanced thing, and it's just more about who can help move people forwards, who can help them bring a little bit more value in every engagement.
Yeah.
That's ultimately how we feel we're going to win in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great mission because I've seen, at least in my years doing sales, like sales has changed so much because you had all this massive influx of tools that came in the mid, whatever, second decade, you can say 2013, 14, 15, et cetera. And
Yeah,
now you get this. I mean, I don't know how many, you probably know this more than I do, of like, there's probably hundreds of sales tools out there, right?
thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, are they even worthy? Are they solving a real problem? Are they just kind of, they're sitting there on the shelf. So I think there is an opportunity to change the game. Maybe AI is part of that, of like changing this game and making people more efficient. Because I'm big with you guys. Like I think it seems like your approach from the research. It's like the human connection is the most important. Like the way that I sell and how I've sold best is just having human connections and having those conversations and helping people. Let's have tools that help me do the mundane crap admin work. I don't need someone to do all the work. I just need it to do that work so I can focus on the potential client and helping them solve problems. Whether we win a partnership or not, I don't know. There's a lot of factors in that. But like you guys are doing, let's get to the right people. Let's get to other people that may be valuable, and let's have this consensus decision, which is going to happen either way. Like let's not joke ourselves. Whether we're having the conversation with people or they're doing it behind the scenes, those conversations are happening. So let's be involved. And I think if there's tools out there that can help with that, that's certainly valuable.
Yeah. I also think too that there is this in technology, there's this mindset of if you can, then you should, as far as automating.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you call that out. I think everybody wants to automate the stuff they don't want to do. But in your quest to automate, sometimes you forget like to look at, okay, well, what's happening at the other side of that automation? What's that experience like for your buyers, right? Like how is that differentiating you from everyone else? And so that's something that we have to come in and kind of change people's perspective around, because people aren't looking through their prospect spam folder. Like they're never sitting down in their day and getting spammed with calls. They don't feel that. So it's definitely an interesting problem to solve, of trying to change the narrative around moving from a seller focused process to, hey, why don't we think about having a buyer focused process where it's amazing. It's an amazing experience for your buyers.
Yeah, you're right. We could probably go on all day about this. We may have to do
Definitely.
another just sales focus. Like, how do we solve the sales problems? What let's talk to the founders out there. Maybe we'll wrap up on this, and you could take it wherever you like. I'd like to do a challenge though. We talk about these action items to get more confidence. You can certainly give advice along the way with it, but is there anything you would encourage if someone has an idea they're sitting on, maybe they're very early, anything you would encourage them to do to challenge them to either think about their problem differently or take action to move forward, and put some meat behind the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. The challenge, let's think.
And it could be a question even to pose I like to say this, like whether it's a solo founder or they have a team, like, hey, this is a question you guys should be asking yourself. If you're not, you're missing a step. It's going to put you behind down the road. It could be a question potentially.
Yeah, it's funny. So the thing that comes to mind, and there's probably way better things tactically that you can do, but the thing I'm thinking about that I wish that I knew was learning from the very beginning to be vulnerable and to reach out to folks that have gone down the road that you're trying to go down. So if you've got a great idea, I think some people will tell you, don't tell anybody, just execute. I agree. I think that's a great idea. But that can sometimes be really challenging because it's so unknown for a lot of people. Some people, they don't even know where to get started. So I would encourage people, wherever you live, if you don't have connections with people that have built a business, I know people like us, we have networks and we have programs. There's run clubs, there's tech clubs in every city almost. There's also forums that you can get on. I would encourage you to go find someone who's done what you're trying to do and tell them your idea, which is going to seem crazy, right? Like, wait, tell them my idea. Tell them your idea. Tell them that you want, some mentorship and help on this journey. And I think that when you invite someone into your world that's done it, and I'm not saying you should go tell your parent, your parents or someone that is just going to maybe give you critical feedback.
Yeah.
But when you invite someone in, it does two things. One is it starts to build this sense of vulnerability that really I think is required as a founder, to put yourself out there and to fall on your face. And then the other thing it does is it makes a friend that actually is going to push you towards what you should do next and give you that confidence of like, hey, this isn't just my friend that says this is a great idea. This is somebody that has done something similar and they're encouraging me or they're asking me to think about things differently.
Yeah.
So that would be my challenge, is to go out, whether it's someone in your network that you already have or whether you need to go cultivate that. Find one person that's done what you've done and be vulnerable with them about your idea. And I think that that's a really great place to start. Also, too, just the right person when you reach out to them, especially people that have built a business. I've never met someone that is going to discourage you from starting the business. Like anybody that's done
Yeah.
this knows how hard it is. And so they're going to encourage you. So if you do reach out to someone and they're super mean and discouraging, like that is not the normal situation. Give it another run. But that would be definitely my challenge for folks listening.
Yeah, that's a good disclaimer. It's that whole, Teddy Roosevelt, like the man in the arena, like the people that are in there and the people that are kind of trying to get things done, they're always going to be supportive and encouraging because they know it takes a village. So yeah, if someone's very kind of cold to you, it's like, all right, you know, who's next? Let me ask someone else because they'll be there. So I agree with you. Jared, this was a lot of fun, man. Where do you hang out online? Where can people say hello to you? Anywhere specific you call out?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Firsttouch.com if you guys want to learn more about what we're doing there. But yeah, always happy to chat if you're a BDR or an AE and you're just, struggling. I know software sales right now is an interesting time. So I'm always happy to chat and give any feedback I can on career growth since I've been there before.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, it's a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on and look forward to keeping in touch on this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.